Good evening, everyone. I will call this May 27th, 2020 meeting of the Richfield Planning Commission to order. We're meeting virtually via Cisco WebEx. Staff will be taking roll call for every vote tonight, beginning with attendance. Will you please take attendance, Nellie?
Hi, Chair Quam.
Here.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
Here.
Commissioner Pink.
Here.
Commissioner Rudolph.
Here.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Here.
Commissioner Lavin.
Here.
All members present.
Thank you, Nellie. Well, welcome everybody to our first virtual meeting of the Richfield Planning Commission. This is a brand new experience for all of us, so we are asking for the public's patience as we work through some of the bumps in this virtual meeting process. It's our hope that the public engage with our meetings just as they have in our in-person meetings, as your input and testimony is very important in our decision-making process. Next, we have approval of the minutes of the February 26, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. Do I have a motion?
Commissioner Pinn, so moved.
Second.
Commissioner Pinn, second.
Commissioner Pinn moves and Commissioner Rudolph seconds. Discussion. I did have a question on the liaison assignments. I didn't see you down, Commissioner Pinn. Did I miss something, or are you supposed to be attached to one of the liaison?
I am not this year due to
Okay.
time constraints. So
Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Yep.
Any other discussion about the approval? Okay, and staff, would you again take roll?
Chair Quam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
Aye.
Commissioner Pinn.
aye.
Commissioner Rudolph.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin.
Aye.
All yays, no nays. The yays have it. The motion passes.
Thank you, staff. All right. We will have an next we have open forum. This is an opportunity for citizens to address the commission on items not on the agenda. For the time being, people can do this by emailing, writing a letter, or calling the city and leaving a voice message. Instructions to do this are on the Planning Commission's agenda and minutes webpage. Staff, did you receive any comments for the open forum tonight?
Chair Quam, there were no comments received for open forum.
All right, thank you. All right, next item is approval of tonight's agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Sean, seconding.
All right, Commissioner Rosenberg moves and Commissioner Hayford O'Leary seconds. Any discussion? And Nellie, would you take roll?
Chair Quam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary. Commissioner Pinn.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin.
Aye.
All ayes. The ayes have it, and the motion passes.
Thanks, Nellie. All right, so we're moving right along. Our first item is a public hearing and consider a variety of land use approvals for a proposal to construct an 82-unit apartment building on 64th Street east of Lyndale Avenue. Future address 600 64th Street West. Staff?
Thank you. North Bay Companies has submitted land use applications for a planned unit development consisting of a new 5-story 82-unit building on 64th Street, as well as renovations to an existing 22-unit building at 6345 Lyndale Avenue. The development site consists of 5 current lots, including the aforementioned apartment building, which will be preserved, 3 duplexes, and 1 single-family home that would be removed to make way for the proposed 82-unit building. The site is located in what has been known as the Lakes at Lyndale area. Since the late 1990s, the city has identified this area for reinvestment and redevelopment. Currently, 4 of the 5 properties are zoned and guided for medium to high density housing. The 5th property, the single family home at 514 64th Street, is zoned and guided for single family or low density residential use. As part of their application, the developer is requesting amendments to the comprehensive plan and zoning designations of the site, requesting that the guiding district be changed to mixed use and the zoning district to planned mixed use. The comprehensive plan designates a large contiguous area just south of the development site as mixed use and as a part of Richfield's downtown, encompassing the greater 66th Street and Lyndale Avenue area. Changing the designation of this property to mixed use would represent a logical expansion of that downtown area, eventually extending up Lyndale Avenue to the city limit at Crosstown, as envisioned in the Lakes at Lyndale plan. The intent of the mixed use category is to create a vibrant, thriving city center. At a work session back in November of 2019, the developer first presented a concept plan to the City Council, Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and the Planning Commission. Prior to submitting a land use application, a neighborhood open house was held on February 27th. Based on feedback from city staff and from nearby residents, the plans were modified to reduce the number of dwelling units and to step down the east end of the building from 5 stories down to 4 stories. The proposed 82-unit building includes 56 studios, 25 one-bedrooms, and 1 two-bedroom unit, which would be an ADA accessible unit on the ground floor. Including the existing 22-unit building, there are a total of 104 units in the planned unit development. The proposed plans include 117 parking spaces on site, 65 of those enclosed or underground, and 52 in surface lots on either side of the proposed building. That comes out to a ratio of 1.125 spaces per unit. The development is eligible for a 10% reduction from the standard 1.25 spaces per unit due to its proximity to frequent public transit service. The proposal meets all zoning code requirements of the underlying mixed-use neighborhood, or MUN zoning district. The proposed building height of 5 stories is within the range allowed in the mixed-use district, or 8 stories maximum. The sole deviation from code is that the number of compact parking stalls proposed here is slightly higher than permitted by code. Code limits compact stalls to be no more than 20% of the total parking supply. Here, that would allow a maximum of 23 compact stalls. 27 compact stalls are proposed in the east parking lot. That would be a parking lot of entirely compact stalls due to its dimensions. So they're requesting to have 4 more compact parking stalls than would ordinarily be permitted. The proposed development site and building are attractively designed and landscaped and would provide a number of amenities to the building's residents, including a fitness center, bicycle storage and repair area, a dog run, and outdoor amenity space. The building's mass is positioned back from 64th Street and from the neighborhood to the east, and it takes advantage of the existing single-family property at the east end of the site for a landscaped buffer space, sidewalk, and surface parking. The proposal enhances public infrastructure by extending a public sidewalk along 64th Street and adds a new trail connection into Garfield Park from 64th Street. Additionally, the proposed plans offer an opportunity to preserve and improve an existing affordable apartment building. Staff finds that the proposed project meets the goals of the comprehensive plan and zoning code requirements, and therefore recommends approval of the applications in front of you. That concludes the staff report. Staff will stand for any questions from the commissioners and from the public. Melissa, do you want to relay the written correspondence that we received?
Thank you, Matt. I do want to mention, if anyone is watching and waiting to participate in the public hearing portion of the meeting, that you'll be able to call in. You should be able to call in now. You'll be put on hold until the public hearing is opened. The number is available on our website. It's also at the header of our agenda, but it is 612-861-0651. In the meantime, we did receive one set of written comments. Those are attached to your report. Those are from Ruth Ann and Kevin Mussiter of 6335 Harriet. I'm going to assume that you had time to review those comments from the Mussiters. We also did receive voicemail calls from a Mr. Peterson. His concerns related to parking, the current excess parking and spillover parking that he sees in the neighborhood already, coming from the Henley 1 and the Lyndale Plaza adjacent to this area. And also he had some concerns about the new connection proposed from 64th Street to Garfield Park. Additionally, I had a message from Alex Asmus, who lives at 64th and Harriet. He mentioned that his concerns were varied. One in particular was in relation to the small children who are present in that neighborhood, and the fact that there are so many parked cars on the streets is dangerous for those children. He does not feel that the 1-to-1 parking ratio that is proposed, it's actually a little bit higher than that, but I believe when he heard it was 1-to-1. He does not feel that that's high enough for this development. Charging for parking, he is not a fan of this. He feels that it pushes more parking onto the streets and does believe that people drive more than the developer was saying at the open house. He also believes that the parking on the streets makes plowing more difficult and that it's difficult to get out onto Lyndale Avenue. He was not a fan of the aesthetics of the project, and he believes there's too much new building in this area in general. Those are the comments that we received via written submission and voicemail. And so if the commissioners don't have any questions, then we could open the public hearing.
Commissioner Lavin?
I just wanted to make sure that I understand how this is going to proceed, because I think there's 3 recommendations, and I want to make sure that I insert my comments in the right place. The first one is to expand or include this area in the comprehensive plan as a mixed use. The second is to include that single family housing as a mixed use, kind of a homogeneous area for this plan. And then the third one is the actual PUD, the planned urban development, the structure, the project plan. So those 3 things would be approved separately. Is that correct? Because if everyone agrees on the first 2 and then has issues with the third, or or vice versa, I just want to make sure I insert my comments where appropriate. I just want to make sure that's what we're approving.
Yes, Commissioner Lavin, that's largely correct. The first motion in front of the commission is the comprehensive plan designation. The second motion is the zoning designation, and then the third is the PUD. That third motion would be where you'd air specific concerns to the proposed development.
And because it's a PUD, that's why we're not specifically requesting a variance for the compact parking spots.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, we will discuss these issues as a single unit here and allow public comment on all 3 of those items. We will not separate them, talk about one at a time. We'll talk about the project. We will vote separately on those motions.
Understand. Thank you.
Any other Commissioner Rudolph?
Thank you, Chair Quam. Staff, does this, the affordable component, is this a requirement to meet any requirements for this project, whether it be TIF or other things? And if so, what percentage of the 22 apartments are part of that affordable component?
Commissioner Rudolph, the applicant is applying with the HRA for tax increment financing. That development, there is no development agreement yet. They're working out those details. There is no requirement in the zoning code that affordable units be proposed or be provided as part of the project, but they are working on providing some of them as part of that agreement with the HRA. Julie, did you have anything to add?
Commissioners, I would just say, yes, we're in process, and the preliminary development agreement indicates that at least 5 of the new units be affordable. So that would, if they stick with just 5, that would leave 17 in the existing building.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
I had a couple of questions, and I imagine we might have more to say after the public has spoken. But I heard from some neighbors as well about these parking concerns on 64th, and I'm particularly curious, a concern that they had, and I think was also expressed in one of the comments that Melissa shared, is that if the parking rents that are being charged are too high, they're not going to be utilized, that space sits empty, and the parking overflows onto the street. So I guess I am wondering, do we have any way of knowing in Henley 1 how many of those are being used, or like what percentage of units have signed up for a parking spot and are paying for that versus them sitting empty?
The developer is on the line. Mr. Oberkriller, would you have that information available?
Yeah, so if you remember, there's 66 units in the apartment building, and then there's 8 townhomes. Currently, there's 2 of the townhomes leased of the 8, and then we're about 70% leased on the apartment building. There hasn't been an excess or extra cars more than 1-to-1. And some people have opted not to have parking, so we don't have a parking shortage or a parking like overparked yet that I can give you the information on. That is detailed, but we do have 1 parking spot per bedroom if I remember the approval.
Okay, I guess I'm wondering about the ones who have opted out. I think the concern is maybe a lot of people have opted out because they're choosing to avoid that fee. And I totally understand separating it, but the concern is, do you have any way of knowing if they simply don't need it because they don't have a car, or they're not using it because they're choosing to park on the street instead?
There's nobody that has chosen to park on the street from what I know. Okay. Yes, we have guest parking, etc. If you remember, the unit size is pretty. There's basically 1 person in each unit.
Okay. And if I could just follow up with one other question for Seth, unless Commissioner Lavin, was this about the same thing that I was asking?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe come back to me, Chair.
Yes. So did you want me to ask that? You basically answered my question. I was wondering if there's bleed over onto the 64th because the people just don't want to pay the fee, or they don't have cars, like, 1-to-1 intended would have a certain amount of people that just simply don't use vehicles.
From my just talking to the neighbors, etc., sellers, most of the parking is happening during the weekends. The spillover where there is like more cars on the street on 64th as a result of guests of the other building. I think the other building is I can't remember the name, but Mr. John Stark knows. Is a little bit underparked, I guess. There's a little bit different unit mix there.
Is there going to be a fee associated to parking in this new development?
Yeah, so like this new development has underground parking. What hampered the first development, Henley 1, was we had $250,000 worth of crosstown concrete in the ground, and we have on-grade parking, so that was a kind of a huge surprise in terms of like soils. This new development has underground parking, like, so it's a negative P1. So it's more expensive to construct, but given the requirements for Richfield, we're in compliance, I guess, and try to do the best, the most we can with parking in the site, etc.
What do you anticipate those fees to be?
Right now we have some at 50, some at 75, and inside it's 100. So we have 26 spots in the existing Henley 1 on the inside, and then we have surface spots. We have surface spots of the balance to make it to 84, I think, or a little bit I can't remember.
So there's fees even for the outside parking then?
Correct.
Okay, and that's,
Private project in Richfield.
can we assume that that same fee structure will be the same in the proposed project?
Yeah, correct. The basin's even more expensive, but we have more underground parking in this building and on grade, and inside parking in this building than the other one. We have a below floor and on grade, and then the existing lot just for the existing apartment building stays, and then we added just an auxiliary lot towards the park. But now the park has access to.
With the new project being on 64th Street and the on-street parking available right there, do you anticipate that there will be some residents that will choose not to pay the fees and simply use residential street parking?
No, I don't really. The existing building that currently exists has 26 spots in 22 units, and I think that's mainly full. It's just it's a different product. I don't think that we'll have a lot of spillover. We have enough parking for 1.25, I believe.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're pretty well parked, given the transit corridor, et cetera. I don't anticipate the same problems that are existing with what's happening with overflow on the weekends with the other building.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary?
My other question was about just some of the details about discouraging traffic through the neighborhood. I guess I'm wondering, number one, do we have any sense, given how busy Lyndale is in that area, if a lot of traffic would be going down Grand to 65th to access the light or future roundabout? Do we have any estimate of that? And I've also noticed, and was pointed out to me by neighbors, for Lyndale Plaza across the street, there was like a no turn on or no right turn sign to discourage that, and the angle of the driveway was also designed to discourage turning east onto 64th Street. So I guess I'm just curious if staff looked at that for this project, if that was or wasn't beneficial, or what the process was to include that or not.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary. We didn't look at that. There was no traffic study that was done as part of this development. I think the assumption being that people are going to exit onto Lyndale, it would be a lot more difficult to get down through the neighborhood to exit. So we did not require a traffic study for this particular project. No.
Okay.
Commissioner Rudolph?
So the question about the apartment building, it looks like that they're pretty much just updating more so the window dressing portions of the building to make it nicer. Was there any thoughts or plans to updating the inside, which I'm pretty sure is probably pretty dated, from the developer or city staff? Or if it was even looked at doing a phase development there and replacing that older building after a newer one is built, so we're not displacing any residents.
Again, I think this is a question that the developer can best answer. So Dan, would you mind taking this, or someone on your team?
Sure. Yeah, so our plan is not to displace any residents, and that's how this is designed, and that's what was requested by the staff. There is some units that have been updated in that building, but we're going to spend most of the money on energy efficiency. We're going to create a new facade on the front to be able to make the public realm, as you look at that building on the corner, more visible, and improve the landscaping, etc. We are going to have all new windows, and all the units will get updated with new finishes. That said, we're 17 of the 22 studios, because they're all studios, and they're fairly large, fairly decent sized studios, are going to get have air conditioning not sticking out the window, etc., and heat options, as well as I think all the utilities. And we have 17 of the units are I believe 50% AMI.
This is Chair Quam. Dan, I'm just having sometimes a little trouble hearing you. If there's any way to speak closer to your phone. That's okay. And I had a question. Go ahead.
Sure. 17 of the units are 50% AMI, and they're really about, we're upgrading the units for energy efficiency, mostly with windows, insulation, etc., and finishes and common area.
This is Chair Quam again. Do you expect that, Dan, do you expect that will increase the rents? What's the plan with the current rent compared to after the renovations?
Sure. Last time I got the rent roll, it was for the staff as well. Studios at about $850 a unit. Does that make sense? And I think the 50% AMI is $950, I believe.
Dan, could you repeat that? It cut out a little bit for me.
We don't have the ability to move the rents up in a way that it should.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Can you hear me? Dan?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but you were cutting in and out for me a bit. I'm sorry to ask you to repeat
sorry.
that. Could you?
We have. I can't remember the 50% AMI number, but it's not off the current. It's not far off the current rent.
Okay.
Exactly. Is it 894, 864, or it all has to be encompassing in the price, including utilities. So I just don't have it in front of me, but it's not displacement. We're not far off what the current rent is, which I believe is about $850, and they're all month-to-month leases.
So by not far off, what does that mean approximately?
I can't remember. Can somebody quickly look up the AMI for that? I think it's I believe it's 889 or something.
Dan, this is Julie for an efficiency. It's 905.
905.
Yeah, it just went up last
So we're
month.
We're at 850 right now, or the current owner is at 850 with all the tenants right now. So the 905 has to include the utilities, etc. So now they're going to have a nicer place to live. So we're not interested in displacing or moving tenants out of the building.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for developer or staff or other? We'll still have time for discussion, but any other questions? Commissioner Lavin.
One last question for the developer. I was wondering if you would be able to share any, like, for what your projected debt service coverage would be on this property. What I'm trying to do is get a sense of how much play there might be in the profitability to maybe limit parking fees, or adjust units to maybe right size parking. But I'm not sure what I'm not sure how close to the you are to what would normally be called a market rate acceptable debt service coverage.
A tricky question to ask. I mean, based on the interest rates and down payment, etc. I think there's a lot of variables for a moving question like that. I don't know that I can articulate without a model.
Well, I would have to believe at this stage you've sketched something out on the back of a napkin.
Well, yeah, but it's
from a performer perspective.
Variables in that number.
Yeah. So
right now we're not achieving the rents. Right now we're not achieving the rents projected. We're at Henley 1. We're basically at 243 a square foot average, and we perform at 264. So we're not hitting, and we're giving away a month free. So the goal, we're building the market. It was hard to get the first project done, and I believe in Richfield, but it was. I can't really answer the debt to coverage ratio in terms of how its stack goes until we have it baked. Really, the drawings aren't done, and the total price isn't done, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not trying to avoid. It's tough to get in the box, but it's not like it's close to 1.20, 1.22.
I do want to jump in for a minute here and just mention that as a project goes through the process with the HRA, our financial consultants review that project, city staff reviews that project. The developer is required to provide a pro forma to that financial consultant that shows that their returns are within reason, that they are getting tax increment financing because the project cannot work without that financing. There's a test that these projects have to meet before they can get that assistance from the city. So the idea that perhaps this is a way to increase their return beyond reasonable limits, I just want to make sure that that's not out there. That's not what happens. That's not the way that these projects are vetted. I also want to remind everyone that the Planning Commission considers land use issues. So absolutely, we should talk about what those parking ratios are and if we're comfortable with them and what the code says. But getting into the financials of the project is not really the purview of the Planning Commission.
Any other questions before we move to the public hearing? Okay. All right. Now we will hear from the public on this matter. As indicated in the mailing related to this hearing, the legal publication, and on our website, public comment is accepted via voicemail, letter, or email. You may also provide live testimony during our public hearing by calling the number provided on the agenda and on our Planning Commission webpage. Again, that number is 612-861-0651. I have some directions, very short for the callers. If you would please mute whatever device you're watching the meeting on. You won't be able to listen to the meeting and talk to us at the same time, or we'll get a lot of feedback and we won't hear you. Callers have up to 5 minutes to share their position. If the callers have questions, staff will be writing those questions down. We'll gather them and we'll answer all of them after the final caller is through the queue, as opposed to a back and forth. I think that's all for directions at this time. I'll ask staff to present any comments that were received via email or voicemail for the public hearing.
Commissioner Plum, I presented those before the discussion of the Planning Commission. That's all we have received so far.
Okay, thank you. So now we will take live calls from the public. Moderator, do we have any callers on the line?
Chair Quam, I believe there is one caller on the line, or there was a minute ago. Sometimes it takes a minute to transfer through.
Okay.
The caller is now in the meeting, Chair Quam.
All right, thank you. Welcome to the public hearing, caller. You have 5 minutes to state your case, and would you start by telling us your name and your address, and please speak clearly. I will give you a warning if you're reaching near your 5-minute allotment. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Nancy Iverson, and I'm at 508 West 64th Street. I'm actually a spokesperson for two other neighbors who are here with me tonight, Harriet Berg and Dave Pregler. So I'm hoping that that if I go longer than the 5 minutes, I think you mentioned earlier it could be a 10-minute element.
You're correct, Nancy. You have up to 10 minutes if you're representing a group. So go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to address the commission and the council. The key issues that have been discussed among the neighbors here are around some of the public comments that you've already shared that you've received through other channels. Really the parking, traffic, safety and privacy, and snow removal. So with the proposed new development, including the existing, they will have 104 units, with 117 parking spaces, 1.125 space per unit. And as the developer mentioned, no option for free parking is provided within the development site. 64th Street already has cars parked every day along the entire eligible south side of the block where this development is proposed. Renters from the existing apartment building at 64th and Lyndale on the southeast corner already are parking on the street. Anytime there are visitors for that building, parking spills 1 to 2 blocks further down 64th Street, as well as onto Harriet Avenue and other cross streets. With North Bay's first Henley project opened on the west side of Lyndale at 64th, I can let the developer know renters from that building are now parking along 64th Street. We watch them come out in the morning and walk across the street to get into their cars. So it's not weekend parking only. It is overnight parking, and it is renters from that building and or already parking here. In addition, anytime someone parks on the north side of the 64th Street becomes essentially a one-lane road. Often cars need to wait, whether going west toward Lyndale or turning east off of Lyndale, for a car to pass before they can proceed on the way. This past winter was the worst since I moved in 5 years ago. Cars parked on either side of the street did not move or were not towed before snow removal. As a result, even if cars were later only parked on one side of the street, it was difficult for two cars to pass through the standing snow. Either a snow plow couldn't get through, couldn't lower their plow, or had to plow around parked cars, leaving large piles of snow. So that development, the existing Henley development, as I understand it, has 1.1 spaces per unit. I am curious to know, the developer, when asked about how many units, mentioned that 70% of the 66 rental units were leased and that they have no issue with parking. What he didn't say was how many of those leased units are availing themselves of the provided parking for a fee. What he did say is they don't have any issue with the one-to-one, and I would argue that that's because they're not fully at capacity yet. My understanding is that the city ordinance was only recently reduced within the last 6 months to a year from 1.5 parking spaces per unit to 1.25 per unit. So with the 10% allowance, that means that neighboring streets are bearing an increase in impact from this high density development. We're already bearing the impact from the existing 64th and Lyndale unit and from the not fully rented initial Henley project without the new development even being built yet. So with this new building, the changes are having and will grow to have an even larger impact on the quality of living in the neighbors further down in this section of Richfield. The traffic, the safety, and more for the neighbors, not just in this immediate block, but further down 64th and along the cross street. Already we see because of the limited parking for the already built development, if anyone has visitors, and if, sometimes someone might have a bridal shower, or if anyone has visitors, that traffic spills up and into the, I don't know if you want to call it the cross street, already around the corner. So I would want to know how many of the rented units are paying for parking, not just that there isn't an issue because the building is not fully rented. For this new development, although the city ordinance does allow that 10% allowance, I'm concerned because of the increasing density of population all on the same corner without adequate parking, and with having recently reduced from 1.5 to 1.25. I realize that more and more people are trying to move towards bicycling to work or using public transportation. But in the today's reality, people still have cars. Couples have more than one car, and they need those cars to go grocery shopping, even if they're using public transportation to commute to work or bicycle. So the reality is we need the parking, and even before this development, our neighborhood is being impacted by the development that's already occurred. Regarding the intent of the mixed use category, from the meeting agenda, it talks about that the goal is to create a vibrant, thriving city center that will serve as Richfield's downtown. The city center is to include a mix of residential, shopping, recreational, and business uses. my concern is that the focus is on building that residential density without the corresponding focus on scaling back density in favor of the additional shopping, recreational, or business uses that really would create that thriving downtown center. Moreover, as I understand it, there is a intended development south of the, I can't remember if it's called Lyndale Gardens, but south of 64th and Lyndale unit that would even greater increase the density of population in this area without presumably adequate parking because of the reduction from 1.5 to 1.25 with a 10% allowance. And related to that, I have a letter from Sharon Meister, the neighbor at 6414 Harriet, who has added that even the businesses in that building have directed people to park on the residential street. So between the increased density and the goal of creating even more, we believe that people are either through financial incentives or directly through signage being directed to park on the streets, and that's going to continue to have a greater impact. One of the questions that we have is the apartment building to the north of the proposed development seems to have parking spots available. It does not seem to be fully in use. I would like to encourage a stance or a recommendation for the developer to try to work out an agreement or an arrangement to allow for more off-street parking and possibly at a no cost or even lower cost that would discourage people from parking on the street because of the availability of parking. Additional concerns that I have is the person nearest what would be the south entrance to the park, and which my neighbor has as a person whose home backs up on the park, is opening park access on the southern end of Garfield Park. That park, the lower 2/3, the southern 2/3 of that park are not maintained.
Excuse me, caller. Caller?
Yes?
Excuse me, you have about 30 seconds. If you can wrap it up, that would be 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So the
Sure.
concern with the park is that that southern 2/3 do not get much use, and if we open a southern entrance, we'll be inviting the constituents that are up to no good, have an easier access point into that park, impacting the safety and impacting the cleanliness and livability of the park for the neighbors who back up on that park. So we would like to consider not having a southern access, or if a shared lot can be negotiated to have an access to that area. So thank you for hearing me. I realize I had a lot to say. We've had a lot of discussions here. So thank you so much for hearing me out on behalf of the neighbors.
Well, thank you for your input. We appreciate it. Moderator, do we have another caller? Moderator?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi. Hello, caller. Welcome to our public hearing. Just a
Thank you.
reminder to mute your television or computer. And you have
Oh, I will do, yep.
and you have up to 5 minutes, and I will give you a reminder soon before
Okay.
5 minutes. So go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Commission. My name is Debbie Yang, and I am a member of the community also, and have talked to another group of neighbors. And actually, our issues are very much the same. One of the things I wanted to talk about is to give you a picture of this neighborhood and this community. I think we could be the poster children for what's good in Richfield. It is a vibrant community, multicultural. We're a close-knit community because we don't have a lot of through streets. We have some physical boundaries on 62. You can't get east because of the railroad tracks. So we're kind of a confined area. And I've lived here for 25 years, and I've really seen this community developing and growing. Right now, I just took a look this last week. In my square block, we have over 12 kids, of which 7 of them are under the age of 2. So what we have is all sorts of brand new owners moving in. The community, I think it was called the Peterson Edition, has about 85 single homes. Most of them are owned and not rented. So I think we're a vibrant community. We watch out for each other, these kind of things. I too have the same concerns about the parking. And I think there's some fallacies going on. I think people think, oh, we're right by a public transportation, so no one's got a car. But that's just not, it doesn't bear out to me. I used to work downtown, and I took a bus, but I also have a car. I think most of the people I know that are bike advocates own cars. So this part about, oh, they're not going to need a car, I don't think that's true. I think most people that live in this community are going to own cars. I get a little concerned. I've heard up to $75 for parking in the parking lot. And to me, I agree with the last caller. I think parking should be free in those lobbies, and other things should be worked out in terms of rent. This is a case of, yes, it could be all about zoning. It could be all about access, these kind of things. But it's also doing the right thing. We have a community. People are out walking. They're out riding their bikes, these kind of things. And I really think the lack of parking is really going to hurt us. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. And would you mind giving us your address if you're still there? I forgot to ask you for that.
Sure. 6334 Grand Avenue.
All right. Thank you. We appreciate that.
Thanks.
Moderator, we're ready for another caller. Hello, caller, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, could you please state your name and address clearly? And I will give you a reminder if you approach the 5-minute mark, and we're ready to hear your testimony. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bill Mueller. I'm at 6325 Lyndale Avenue in the apartment complex. My concerns are parking. The $75 parking that I think I heard from the last caller and the one before that should be free. I agree. There is a lot of 63rd Avenue street parking, and when it snows, it is very difficult to go back and forth. Tolling sometimes happens, sometimes it doesn't happen. I've heard a lot of information about the 22 units. I'm not sure I heard much about the 82. How many of those are going to be affordable? How many of those are going to be ADA compliant? How many of those are going to be able to be afforded by just the regular populace? I think that's basically my concerns is the traffic, the cost for the parking, and the parking in general, or lack thereof at this point in time. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you, caller. We appreciate it.
Going to be.
Hello, caller. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, could you start by telling us your name and address and speak clearly? And I'll give you a reminder if you approach the 5-minute limit. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the time to address the commission. This is Michelle Hawkins. I live at 6328 Harriet Avenue. I live here with my husband Jake and my daughter Quinn, who's 18 months old. I do have some concerns about this development. While I do think it could provide some, maybe good opportunities, I do have a lot of concerns. One that has been stated is the street parking. The previous development that just went up across Henley does already have traffic on 64th Street and 63rd Street. This is not just on the weekends. While it does increase on the weekends and drive down onto Harriet, further down on 63rd and further down on 64th, it is every day of the week. Whether I try to get out from my house going Harriet to 64th or 63rd, it is always very difficult with all the cars on both sides. So I would encourage to look at parking that is free. Additionally, what other people have said is I really just don't believe that anything less than the 1.5 ratio for parking is suitable. I've lived in downtown Minneapolis. Our family came from Minneapolis and we had cars. I currently work downtown and we have 2 cars. It's just not feasible. While my husband bikes to work when he can, we also have a car and you're driving. The thought that people won't have cars in today's society, especially coming to Richfield, Richfield is just not known as being a commuter city and where people are going to be transient and without cars. Another issue is I still have issue with the height of the structure being at 5 stories versus the 4. Another thing with just the safety and the amount of cars is there are a lot of children in the area. When we're trying to walk around our neighborhood, we already don't have sidewalks, but to go anywhere near 64th Street already is very difficult with all of the traffic, with all of the cars that come. Harriet is being more and more used. We've been living here for 2 years, and the amount of cars that are coming down from Harriet who are going from Lyndale to try to get to 64th Street, those current developments, is already increasing. And those people who use this as a through street don't care. They're the ones speeding down, not slowing down. To me, I moved into a family neighborhood and it's losing that feel and that sense of safety. Also, so with regard, my property backs up to Garfield Park already. Increasing this with already adding a parking basically in my backyard and opening this up, it allows for through traffic. And the 2/3 of the park that is already there is unkept. It's full of weeds, unkept fencing that's deteriorating with landscaping. So if there is going to be direct access there for them, I would like direct access myself, but also for that park to be looked at to be kept up. So I think that was kind of a majority of my concerns that I wanted to share, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you for your input. Moderator, we're ready for another caller. Hello, caller. Welcome to the public hearing. Please state your name.
Thank you.
Hi, could you please state your name and address clearly for us, and then begin your share? I'll give you a reminder if you're beginning to reach the 5-minute allotted time. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So my name is Alex Osmus. I live at 6401 Harriet Avenue. And I would like to echo a lot of the things that have been said. I also agree that parking should be required or free for the residents, as it will cause many issues, as already stated. Me and my wife have lived in this neighborhood for just over 6 years. And we moved to this neighborhood for many of the same reasons the previous callers have said. It's a vibrant community. My parents' first house was in Richfield as well, and when we moved down here from Fargo, to live in Minneapolis again, this is where we decided to live because it's a great community. And I feel that this development, residential development, in addition to the previously already constructed residential developments across Lyndale, is too much too quick. In the 6 years that we've lived here, we have seen a huge majority of the houses in this entire neighborhood turn over to small young families just like us. We, as a family, decided to remodel our home instead of moving out into the suburbs, which is a common thing because we love living in this area so much. But now that's becoming regrettable due to this development. It sounds like the gentleman from the development company was unprepared for this conversation. He didn't have answers to hardly any of the questions that were asked, which is much like the town hall he hosted for us as well. In fact, the gentleman was drinking and he even left in the middle of the meeting. It was a very unproductive meeting. Charging people to an optional fee to pay for parking, they simply won't do it, especially when you consider the economic times that people are, which is not going to go away anytime soon. If I was in someone's position paying for efficiency priced apartments, I would try to save $1 too. What I heard from the gentleman representing the development company is that they don't think there's going to be an issue because there isn't an issue yet. But what he didn't say is there's no guarantee that there will be an issue in the future, especially when we're not even at capacity for the previously constructed buildings. As far as the traffic going onto Lyndale in the 6 years I've lived here, I think to say it's a challenge is putting it lightly. I think saying it's a nightmare is probably more accurate. I commute in the morning to St. Louis Park, and there's many times where just leaving my house, I've had to wait to turn onto Lyndale for 5, sometimes 10 or 15 minutes. I can't imagine what this additional situation with these vehicles are going to add to that time frame, especially if nothing is done to that intersection. The woman previously who said that there's about a dozen children within her neighborhood, her area, I would say for the entire neighborhood of 4 or 5 square blocks, that number is at least doubled. There's so many young children, and that's our biggest concern because we have a child that's 10 months as well. And I've seen some very dangerous things happen where cars are speeding to bypass Lyndale and try to sneak through our neighborhood to get to behind the hub shopping area. People flying down that road extremely fast. I can only imagine what 80 more residents plus will add to that danger, especially if the parking situation isn't addressed and people are parking on the street, which they will do because they already are.
Caller, if you could wrap up your comments, I'd appreciate that.
That's all I had to say. I just wanted to say we decided to remodel our home recently and live here because we love the Richfield community, and it's now starting to become regrettable because this is the vibrant community we want to live in, and we want it to be safe for our children and the dozens of children in the same neighborhood as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moderator, do we have any more callers?
Chair Kwan, there are no more callers at this time.
All right, thank you. Seeing as there is no more public input, would someone like to make a motion to close the public hearing and someone second it?
I make a motion to close the meeting, the public portion.
Second it.
Thank you. Commissioner Lavin makes a motion and Commissioner Rudolph seconds the motion to close the public hearing. Nellie, would you be so kind as to take roll call?
Thank you. Yes. Chair Quam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
Aye.
Commissioner Quinn.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg. Commissioner Rosenberg.
I don't see Commissioner Rosenberg on the call right now. Perhaps she is having internet issues. Let's just move on.
Commissioner Lavin.
Aye.
5 ayes, 1 absent. The ayes have it, and the motion passes.
Thank you. All right, so commissioners, now I'm not sure how we're going to make these motions because they are there's 3 of them and it's complex. So the staff have some suggestion about how to word the first motion, and then we can have discussion or how we should proceed.
Well,
I would recommend that you discuss the project as a whole unless someone is ready to move on on the first motion. Otherwise, I would stick with your broad discussion for this moment.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, Commissioner Lavin.
Yes, I'll start. And speaking about this entire project, the concept of the project, I'm in favor of the redesignation and the rezoning. I think a project here makes sense. Anytime we can get capital inflows into a building that certainly needs it, while keeping the affordability portions is something good for the city. What my concern about is the impact to the existing neighborhood. I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we maintain the integrity of our existing neighborhoods as we go through these development proposals. And certainly, as we heard tonight, and what I've seen and witnessed and talked to with neighbors, is that this will have an adverse impact. In fact, to assert that there won't be any parking coming from this potential development bleed onto that 64th Street is naive at best and disingenuous at its worst. It will. We see that from the Plaza development to the south. I've been there several times over the last couple of weeks, and there's been no less than 10 cars parked on there at various times of days, and it's worse at night. So obviously, there's a safety issue, there's a parking issue, there's a residential integrity issue, as we heard from multiple people tonight, and I think that needs to be addressed. And I think that we as a commission need to start, putting back the integrity when we have these public sessions. We always say that we want to listen to residents. This is a deal in which we have control. They are getting TIF money. HRA is selling properties to this development. Therefore, we have leverage. I guess that the fact that it meets a minimum parking ratio is a concern that I foresaw when we reduced that months ago. Every time we build on this corridors, we're gonna have the same discussion. That's for another time. But for this particular project, given the concentration that we have with these 3 new developments, relatively new developments in this small area, and the fact that Richfield does have influence, I think that it would be incumbent upon our city, our commissions, our council, to make sure that the residential people are heard, and that we do what we need to do to protect the integrity of our neighborhoods that have boundaries on these developments. So those are my general thoughts. Again, overall, I'd like to see a new development in this area. I just think it needs to be done right. Thank you.
Commissioner Bruto.
so I've got a question for staff, and this is something that I'm kind of thinking. It just sounds like with the saving of the apartment building, and just updating the window dressing, and not having a plan to actually update that, not displacing these people, but updating that apartment. It sounds like, we're just putting, lipstick on something, use a lipstick on a peg. It's not really addressing, and I'm assuming that, those 17 or 22 apartments are being used for affordable forecasts with what they're going to the HRA with TIF. I think it would be really a disservice to the affordable community that needs affordable housing by just updating the outside if this is part of their whole plan. I do have a sense with Commissioner Lavin, the parking issues on the street. And you're right, we do need to listen to our community members. That's all I have for now. It was a form of a question to staff as well with the numbers of the apartment building for their affordable numbers.
Commissioner Pan.
Thank you. I really just want to piggyback on the last two commissioners' feedback. I am all in favor of repurposing the existing units, especially if it preserves affordable housing and if it preserves, people being able to live in those units. But at the same time, I don't exactly, I do echo the sentiment where I think the fee versus no fee for the parking is kind of a reverse incentive to just park on the street. I think I would do the same if I were in that situation when I was younger, moving into one of my first apartments too. And I also don't know though, and this maybe staff can give feedback on this. In terms of requirements such as us wanting to see fee versus no fee parking and us wanting to require 1.5 spaces per unit versus what it currently is. What authority do we have within the planning commission tonight to approve or not approve based on those conditions? Can we tack such conditions on as those two requirements, fee versus no fee parking, and increasing the units per increasing the parking spaces per unit to 1.5? Can you comment on that?
Commissioner Kwong, maybe I can take a stab at a couple of those questions. And I'm not sure that there were a whole lot of questions in the public testimony, but I have a few things to share on that too. In terms of fee versus no fee, there's nothing in the zoning code that says that you must provide free parking. It says that you must provide parking. The planning commission would not be able to vote down a project that met because of parking being charged for a fee. That wouldn't be reason enough to legally vote down a project. In terms of the 1.5 versus the 1.25, the 1.25 is the current standard. That is what the standard is that you can apply. The additional reduction for transit is an opportunity. And I think that the Planning Commission could say that in this case, for reasons X, Y, and Z, we don't think it's appropriate to apply that additional 10% reduction. And therefore, they would need to provide approximately 13 additional spaces in some manner. Commissioner Rudolph asked about the the rehab units in the building along Lyndale Avenue. Rehabbing and maintaining affordability specifically at these lower rates of affordability, this 50% of AMI, is incredibly difficult. And the opportunity to provide an upgrade to these units through energy efficiency, through improved common areas, through a sense of community by building another building as part of it. Those are things that are important to that building and would maintain it with perhaps only a $50 rent increase. It's incredibly difficult to do this work. We've seen that on the south side of town with Aon, and so from staff's perspective, the improvements that they are proposing are a win for this building. I did want to clarify that the HRA does not currently own any of these properties. It's all private sellers that this developer is working with. They are coming to us for tax increment finance, to the HRA for tax increment financing, but they're not actually purchasing any property from us. I'm going to go through, if it's okay with you, Commissioner Kwong, a few of the comments that came up in the public portion.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. So there were some questions about the park access. That's something that we heard in written comments, in the voicemails, and then also from some of the callers tonight. I did want to say that we spoke about this at length with our Recreation Services Director. And I checked in with public safety about this park. Are there a lot of safety calls here? What are the benefits or negative to adding this connection. And from there are not excessive crime calls to this area that that we were aware of or that we could find. There are calls about loose dogs. Those are calls that the Recreation Service Director gets, and also I saw those on our crime reporting map. From her perspective, adding this additional connection not only improves access for people south of the park, this actually improves safety by allowing more people into that park. It's eyes on the park, it's people watching. From her perspective, let me just look at a couple of the things that she shared with me. She said that she does get calls regarding broken fencing along the perimeter and about people letting their dogs run free in the park. You know, opening it up, if it's not completely enclosed, perhaps this takes care of some of that. People aren't going to let their dogs run free if it's open. In terms of the fencing, we will have to check into that. I don't know offhand who owns all of these fences, if that is even our the city that owns those. If it's private fencing, then that's something, those are calls that we should be addressing from a property maintenance standpoint, and we can certainly look into that. The Recreation Service Director also said the play equipment is very popular with children in the neighborhood, and the new path will improve the connectivity and allow people on the south end with children to access that park more easily. Long term, she would like to create a walking path from the south side of the park to the north side. And that would open the park so it doesn't feel so fenced in, and maybe allow for better aesthetics, improve sight lines, and might make people feel safer and less enclosed while in that park. So from her perspective, this was a real opportunity to take advantage of what now is kind of an odd little park. So I wanted to hit on those couple of things. I wasn't aware that there were any commercial businesses that were directing people to park in the neighborhood. That is something that we can look into. My understanding is that there were signs that told people that if they could not find parking in the front of that commercial building, that they should look in the back. But that's certainly something that we can follow up on. That's not the way that they should be directing their traffic. Okay, I think those were the basic questions. I'll turn it back over to the commission and steal some more.
Commissioner Pien.
Thank you. I think I can speak to the issue of directing traffic as well. You know, it's as much as I love 165 and the businesses that are in that, you know, in that strip mall there, a lot of parking is directed back to, what is it, Garfield and Harriet. There are signs that were, last I checked about a few months back, there were signs directing traffic to to other street parking. So, you know, if that's not permitted, I thought it was kind of odd that they were directing that, but if that was permitted or not, or if it's even allowed, I'm not sure. But you know, I can see how that does add to the issues for especially late night parking in the area. And even looking at Google Street View without any of the other units being constructed across Lyndale, you can see the parking is lined all the way up 64th, at least on the one side. You know, and so it's, you know, I'm not saying, you know, this is not calling into question any of the testimony at all from the residents. You know, it's actually validating it more than anything. And you know, I really kind of stuck as to how we can address a lot of these issues that are going to be cropping up as a result of this. And I don't know if it's a matter of, you know, restricting the number of units that are available in conjunction with the number of spaces, you know, parking spaces per unit. I don't really know what other tools are at our disposal at this point in the process. I just, you know, guidance from staff or other commissioners in your experience, you know, what have you seen as alternatives to this? Because, you know, I really do want to see this development happen, but I'm not comfortable with the parking situation and the traffic situation as it sits right now.
Okay, Commissioner Hayford O'Leary, and then Commissioner Lavin, and then the chair will have an input. Go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot the mute button. Just wanted to talk about the parking, and I went to the neighborhood. I really appreciate hearing the input, and particularly the concerns about 64th Street during the winter, I think are very valid. I think one challenge when we have these conversations about potential parking on the street is I think we all have kind of different ideas on what's appropriate and what's acceptable of how street parking gets used. If I look on Google Street View right now, 100% of the cars in that particular image, I'm sure it is different at different times of the day, 100% of the cars parked on that street are in front of that apartment building. And to me, I sometimes park in front of my own house. It does seem reasonable for cars to be parked in front of their own property at the very least. Obviously, if cars are overflowing significantly, that's a concern and maybe a sign that they didn't provide enough parking. And if there's a safety issue, which I believe there may be in the winter of it being overparked and too narrow, I'd like to see that addressed, but I don't know that this is the appropriate place to address it. I did want to say one of the points of us having liaisons is we can work with other commissions. I am the Transportation Commission liaison, and I would like Public Works to look at during the winter, be monitoring this and making sure that it is maintaining a safe width and possibly look at restricting parking on 64th Street. So I think that is something that should be looked at, but I don't know it should be part of our decision tonight in terms of how that street parking on 64th gets used. So in terms of whether the ratio they're providing is appropriate, it is true that we reduced it. I do want to emphasize again, the way our parking code works is that it's by unit. These are all tiny units. They're almost entirely studio apartments. I would expect compared to a typical building, it's going to have much less parking. Or much less parking demand compared to a building of 2 bedrooms. I think John Stark in one of our work sessions pointed out that if they just took down some interior walls, they could require half as much parking by making everything a 1,000 square foot apartment instead of 2 500 square foot apartments. I suspect if we were to lay down the law on this and say, we need, we can't accept this at 1 1/8, they would probably do that. There's simply no more space for parking on the site without buying another house, which I don't think I'd want to lose more housing. So I suspect they'll just be combining units, making more expensive units, and I don't know that that's something we want to encourage. So I absolutely want to address the concerns that we've had. I think particularly if there's a safety issue on the street. But I do think it's appropriate at the ratio they proposed, just given what's going on with other developments in our city, given what we've seen, given what other cities do for parking, it seems reasonable and I wouldn't want that to hold up. I will say we can come back to it if we move along and we do decide to go forward with the PUD. There are 2 details that I would like to see us address. One is improving that access to Garfield Park to make sure there is actually access all the way to the street. Since that sidewalk dead ends, there wouldn't be an accessible access to the path. That concerns me because I think that path is an amenity to most neighbors. I know there are concerns about it. I want to be sure that they get the maximum value out of that. And I would like to see those no left turn signs out of the driveway. I think it's, it may or may not be enforceable, but I think it's a reasonable ask. We do want to discourage cars from going down those streets that don't have sidewalks, that are full of kids. So I think directing cars to Lyndale would be appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. And excuse me, we're getting a lot more feedback than we were in the first half of the meeting. If people can mute themselves, even if they're on the phone calling in, if you try to mute your phone or your computer, I have to be unmuted because I'm calling on people, but we're getting a lot of feedback. Commissioner Levin, you were next.
Yeah, just I guess I disagree with the last commissioner's comments that that there won't be any impact, or that the impact that or the 1.125 ratio provides a sufficient buffer. I just simply don't think that's true. There's evidence that suggests that that's not true based on what's going on right now. Certainly, Plaza North has something well north of 1.2, 1.25, and that's pushing cars onto the street. So again, I side with the residents. I side with here, and I would direct the commission to the language in the supporting of the necessary approval for a PUD application to number 5. The development will not have undue adverse impacts on neighboring properties. And I think, instead of trying to come to what the right ratio for parking is in this situation, again with the concentration and the fees and all of the elements that are present, I'm wondering if this commission could simply say, if we choose to say that we reject the PUD as is, the development plan as is, and send it back to HRA to work out something with the developer and the residents that would be more of a mutual agreement. Again, I think it's all about listening to the constituents, and certainly I think there's enough evidence that supports their case. That's my comments.
Commissioner Penn, did you raise your hand? Or, okay. This is Chair Quam. I guess, let's see if I'm muted. I'm impressed by the firsthand eyewitness from the people that live there. I do believe their testimony was credible about people coming over from the two new developments. They're seeing them come over. I don't think anyone would make that up. And it isn't fully occupied yet. I'm just really concerned about the parking issues here, like most of us are. I guess the idea that we don't have any tools, it's not legal for us to say anything about charging for whether the landlord charges for parking or not. When I heard that ratio that, that we just recently changed, I guess I just assumed it was for free parking. I mean, maybe I'm naive, but it never occurred to me, well, that would be the same ratio if they charged whatever they wanted for a parking spot. Because of course people would not want to park there as much as they would if, Byerly's has a, 1.5 for every 5 people, I mean, whatever. But I'm concerned about that, and if it's true, Melissa, that we don't have any way to address that, they not charge for parking, and then that it's coming so quickly on the heels of the Henley one and Lyndale townhomes and condominiums, that we don't know quite how this is going to play out, but it does sound like undue burden in the parking sense, and I'm wondering what our options are to address that, if it does mean sending it back. Or I like other parts of the development, and I mean, size is always an issue. We hear that every meeting. The height is never popular, but the parking seems really difficult to get around.
Chair Quam, I agree. There were a lot of good concerns brought up about the parking, particularly parking in the winter. We are running into that in other places where residents don't have a place to move, and that creates a problem for the neighborhood. It creates a problem for those residents. And we have recently changed these regulations. So I do think that it would be reasonable if the commission would say, we want to stick with that 1.25 number. We're not ready to give an additional reduction for transit in this particular area. And perhaps direct the developer to look to that apartment building to the north, the Lyndale Garden Apartments, that does have excess parking at this point. Something I want to say about parking is that this really is more of an art than a science. I will say that the parking needs for a development change drastically over the life of a project. They can be very high when a development comes in and it's new. And then as the project goes through its life, you end up with a parking lot that looks like the Lyndale Garden Apartments parking lot just to the north. And so we're trying to right size here, and we're trying to right size for the long term. I think in this case, it would be a great compromise to have them work with that apartment complex to the north, rather than look for opportunities to create additional impervious surface or just remove some walls to reduce the number of units just to make that math work. From a planning perspective, I don't know if that would work from a pro forma perspective. But I think in this case, that seems like a great compromise to pursue for the Planning Commission, is to direct them to look to meet that 1.25, which is the minimum requirement.
Commissioner Lavin?
Did you talk to me? Did you call me?
No, what, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just want to
Okay. I'll call you right after Commissioner Lavin, just because I had already called.
Excuse me. Okay.
It's okay. Go ahead. You're muted.
Sorry. My question is simply, would it be wise to be that specific, other than maybe more general, to say that something should be worked out involving residents, HRA included, that would alleviate the parking concerns that are there. I mean, we could say 1.25 and, they could come back at 1.25 and that's maybe the magic number. Or is it, and maybe we should go that route. My lack of experience in trying to direct what our actual end goal is do we want to be that specific, or do we say something more or less of, HRA controls this deal because of the TIF. They're the ones that are going to be able to work with the developer on something that's more amenable to all parties. Is that the way to go, or should we, or should we do the 1.25, Melissa? What are your thoughts on that? I'm not sure how it's gone in the past.
The HRA doesn't generally get involved in the land use part of it. I think sending it back to the HRA is not necessarily helpful. I do think the Planning Commission should say, not necessarily prescriptively, you should go to this property owner, but we should say, if you want to approve the project and it is the parking that is holding you up, I would recommend that you recommend to the council that they approve it if they can meet with off-site parking, or I'm sorry, off-street parking ratio of 1.25. That's how I would recommend that you would proceed if that's your hang up.
Commissioner Rosenberg?
Yeah, I just want to kind of bring back some historical concept here, because I really encourage us to look for that compromise that Commissioner Levin's talking about, mainly because there were two big projects back when I was on the council. One was Gramercy. The other one was the apartments down at 76th and Lyndale, and the name escapes me now. But we didn't look for that compromise. And there was lots of problems, especially in Gramercy. I think there were some assumptions when they built that the seniors that were living there were only going to have one car per apartment. As it turned out, these were young seniors who moved in there, so there was two cars. They didn't have enough for for a lot of visitors, so then they had to park on the street. Same thing happened down at 76th and Lyndale. So we've got to look for compromise, and we've also got to pay attention to what the neighbors want. So I think that is good advice, to look for that compromise. I think because of the street parking, because of the density there, there is a need for more density. There is a need for all this, but we also have to keep in mind the homeowners that are there too. And if we can look for a way so that we can accommodate that for both people, for both groups, we will have done our job. History is there, and Melissa, maybe this was before your time, but there were a lot of headaches because of those decisions that were made on those two developments back in the 90s. So anyway, history is a good teacher, and we have to kind of remember that. And we have to remember that we are there for the public as well as the developers. And I for some reason, my other computer gave out, so I missed a lot of that conversation there at the end, the last caller. But I heard enough from the first ones. And I know that there are issues down in that area, so with traffic and parking and everything. So let's look for that compromise.
This is Kwam. Not to put you on the spot, but Commissioner Rosenberg, do you have any ideas what that compromise would look like based on the history you were referring to, or what the lesson learned was?
Well, the lessons were learned that there's assumptions that a lot of developers do like to make that don't necessarily hold true. I think what they're saying about the transit and bikers and all that, yeah, they're going to be there, but as some of the neighbors said, they're all going to have cars, and that's what we found out in Gramercy, and it caused a lot of headaches there. If anything we can do to avoid those headaches, I don't have a whole lot of solutions there. I'm just talking right now about history, and we're smart people. Let's look for those.
Matt, staff?
Commissioners, while everyone was talking, I had the chance to look up some parking numbers for Lyndale Plaza, just to throw some, we heard a lot about Lyndale Plaza. So just to add some context here, Lyndale Plaza, while it's been said that it has a parking ratio of about 1.4 stalls per unit. That property actually has a pretty high percentage of 2 and 3 bedroom units in it. Of the 94 units there at Lyndale Plaza, nearly half are 2 or 3 bedrooms. There are actually 142 bedrooms in the building for 135 parking stalls. So while 1.4 at that building sounds like a much higher parking supply relative, it's actually 0.95 per bedroom. Whereas here at the proposed project, there's just 1 2-bedroom unit. So we're looking at 117 stalls for 105 bedrooms, which is still right around that 1.125. But relative to Lyndale Plaza, technically more parking stalls per bedroom than the Lyndale Plaza project.
Commissioner Lavin.
I hear arguments like that all the time, and I wonder, how do the additional cars then materialize in front of these properties that supposedly have adequate parking ratios? Because they do, and we see that they do. And so I don't understand the math that suggests that if we, equate the number of cars to bedroom 1-to-1, then magically we'll have enough parking, because I simply don't believe that. And historically, it doesn't work out, as we can see with what's happening. So I caution the commission for buying into that.
Who's next? Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
Well, first off, I appreciate that information about the bedrooms. I understand that we might disagree about how relevant that is, but it's at least nice to bear in mind. I do want to say that the sort of opportunity or suggestion that Melissa offered, I liked. I think I'm maybe the most open to the idea that they currently have enough parking, but I think it's a reasonable compromise to say there's a lot going on here. There are existing concerns. We could require the 1 1/4 offsite. I guess I'm curious, for the commissioners who are specifically concerned there isn't enough parking, does that go far enough to address your concerns? I would still like to do the things I mentioned earlier in terms of directing traffic to Lyndale, but I would say I would be personally fine compromising with requiring the 1 1/4 offsite, or however they want to address that.
Commissioner Lavin.
My personal opinion is we should be higher than 1.25. If that's our standard in our policy requirement, just the simple concentration of these multifamilies would suggest that we should be north of that. So I personally would like to see higher. I understand that there's always need to be compromise, and most likely we'll end up at 1.25. But for the sake of keeping the residents happy that are there, having their backs, I would like to go forward with something north of 1.25. And if that doesn't pass, then maybe 1.25 is the fallback.
Commissioner Hayford.
Do we have the ability to require more than the minimum, or what's our process for that for staff?
No, not really. The parking minimums are what your code requires. So, this is a PUD. There's expected to be some give and take on a project. However, I think that in this particular case where they're asking for a couple of additional compact parking stalls, it would be difficult to legally argue that in exchange, kind of in that exchange that goes along with this PUD, that we're going to request that they provide 1.5 or something north of what our minimum standards are in the code.
Mr. Lavin.
But how does that work then? If we're willing to say, because it's a PUD, we're not going to, require a variance for certain limits, then because it's a PUD and there's a lot of amenities and a lot of goods and positives and maybe some things that we have to overlook, why can't we come back and say that because of the certain situations and the concentrations, what's actually happening now, that to make this PUD effective and to alleviate the adverse impact which we consider to be on the neighborhood, that we need something more than 1.25?
Well, I think that the developer could come back with a proposal that actually isn't a PUD, that just requests the straight zoning of the property. And then they'd have to figure out how to make those spots not compact. But if they could do that, which is likely reducing what we've tried to make as large a buffer as possible next to that single family home, what they'd end up doing is reducing that. And I'm not sure that that gets us where we want to be. And then we wouldn't have any power at all. So we'd be, I see what you're saying. I'm not sure that legally that's going to get us where we tried to go.
Commissioner Rudolph?
I've got a question with regards to the comprehensive plan and the zoning portion, because we've got a single family home involved in this. So what happens if we approve this and we can put in it that it would, the zoning of that residential single family home would roll back if, you know, this falls through on their end? You know, we've approved many projects to go forward that eventually don't ever go anywhere.
That's a good question, Commissioner Rudolph. I think that you can condition a rezoning on certain items taking place. For instance, you could put in place something that says that this rezoning is not effective until a development agreement is signed with the HRA. For instance, in this case, since we know that they are going to the HRA to ask for assistance, it's unusual that would happen, but it has happened in certain cases more often with a vacation, like of a road. We're not going to actually publish the vacation of this road until we start construction on this project. But you could, I think, on the signing of a development agreement with the HRA.
Thank you.
This is Chair Quam. I'm wondering if it's appropriate to ask the developer if they have any solution to our trouble over the parking issue. Do you have any ideas how you might change things? Are you there? Is the developer there? I'm not sure which line you might be on. I did mute everybody because there was so much background noise. I'm gonna try unmuting the phone calls in case that will help.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. This is Daniel from North Bay. It's been a enlightening conversation. Thank you for all the context and just conversation. We've started this development at like 112 units, I believe, and we have worked with the neighborhood group to get it down to 84 or 82, excuse me, and have worked to be in sync and to be part of the plan. So it's not like we have been going against the grain in terms of where we started, where we were at today. So I just want to reference that we have been listening and we have been dealing with the concerns, etc. The building for the existing building, really everything has to fit, including utilities, in the 905. And there's 5 units that are affordable in the new building, as well as there's the only 2-bedroom unit in the city of Richfield, I understand, on grade for a handicap unit. So there'll likely be a handicap spot close to that. We've maximized the parking in relation to the overall site plan and public realm. I guess the feeling of it, we wanted to keep the broad opening for the park throughout as big as we can. We will have electric car charging. We will have we can have car sharing if that appeals to anybody, and we do have bike. And I would never say that people don't have cars. The reality is people do. But the size of these units are just like the Henley one. The average unit size was 460 square feet, and these are slightly larger, but they are single. We're only seeing single occupants in the units. And so I think what we're seeing across the street in the plaza is we're seeing a double occupants, 2 cars for a family, more than one family living in a 3-bedroom, etc., that spill over. I can tell you that the construction parking for the current townhomes that are being built or the condominiums behind us are taking up 30 of my spots during the day, and we don't have a problem with people parking. If anybody's parking from our building, it's because of they have guests, etc. Or I'm going to go look very, very closely at how many people are walking across that street. That's really hard to cross for the parking, because I think we're parking 95 to 90 plus of the tenants on our site. So we haven't had any pushback regarding pricing for the parking. We have been having to give 1 month free rent for to get up to this percentage, and we're happy with where we're at. But it has been, this is a first Class A building in Richfield. We're trying to help it be accord. The building, it's about $25,000 a spot to build below grade. And we have a whole one subfloor in the Henley 2 project, or this project that's before you, as well as a half a garage on grade. So we're really trying to maximize the parking, and we have worked to get a better ratio than we started with throughout the process, and feedback from the neighborhood group as well as staff. So right now on the 22 studios, I believe they're using probably about 22 spots. There's 26 on there. Most of the studios only have one resident, from what I know. I don't own it, but right now, but they have they don't have 2 tenants in there for the most part. So we're just, things have kind of evolved, I guess you could say. And I'm a fan of parking, not a fan of parking in general. So we have been maximizing the parking we fit on the site.
So you don't have any ideas? We've been brainstorming here, and do you have any ideas we haven't thought of about how to improve?
Well, I haven't talked to this. Well, I think we've made it a long way since we started, and maybe John or Scott Nelson can elaborate a little bit better articulately. But I haven't talked to the neighbor behind us in the sea of parking of what some referenced earlier with the apartment buildings that butts up to the park. I haven't done that. And this is the first I've heard that the commercial businesses are telling to park on the street. So, street parking is public parking, and I'm very sensitive, and I'm all game for figuring out if should be a right turn or left turn coming out of the lots, and guiding traffic towards Lyndale and not into the neighborhood. So I'm very open, but I believe Lyndale's a county road, and that intersection in general has it's a little wide and dangerous, and etc. Just the way it's designed. So whatever we can do to help the county kind of move a plan forward with making it a better place to drive, probably the best thing we can do there.
Thank you.
And Scott, did I miss anything, I guess, or John? So we can have a car charging station, electric car, bike transportation, etc. I'm open to pretty much any of the ideas that we can leverage.
Other discussion? Does the commission want to proceed with a motion?
I'll make a motion. Peter, your mic is on. It's kind of, oh, thanks. So I would move the first item that we recommend approval of a resolution that amends the comprehensive plan to designate lots 3 through 8, Block 5, Lyndale Oaks Edition as mixed use.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Commissioner Hayford or Leary made the motion, and Commissioner Lavin seconded. Now we need some discussion, if there is any. There's no discussion, so Millie, will you take roll?
Yes, thank you. Chair Quam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
Aye.
Commissioner Pinn.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and the motion passes.
Thank you, Nellie. So what is our second motion? It's about the zoning designation. Someone like to put that into a motion?
I would, but I would also like to kind of protect the single family in case it does not go through. I'm trying, so if I'm trying to find the wording here of it right now. What page is it on? My laptop went dead, so I'm trying to pull this up on my desktop real quick.
Chair Quam, I'm wondering if just the way we've done this in the past, when we add or adding conditions, we make the sort of general motion first and then we vote on the amendment. And if that's agreeable, I would just make the motion as written and then with the expectation that somebody will be amending it. But I move to recommend approval of an ordinance that amends the zoning code, designate lots 3 through 8, block 5, Lyndale condition as planned mixed use.
And I'll second.
Okay, motion was made by Commissioner Hayford O'Leary and seconded by Commissioner Rosenberg. Discussion?
So Commissioner Rudolph, if you have a condition that you wanted to attach.
I would like to add a condition that if they don't sign a development agreement or if it doesn't go through, the zoning go back to revert back to its original zoning.
I'll second that.
So it was moved by Commissioner Rudolph and seconded by O'Leary. The amendment to the original motion. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand it. Commissioner Rudolph, can you repeat what you were saying? I didn't understand it.
Chair Quam, I can read back the amendment.
Okay, thank you.
The Rudolph Amendment was if a development agreement is not approved by the HRA, the zoning designation will revert to R, single family residential.
Thank you. Any discussion on that amendment?
Commissioners, if I may, I would actually recommend that you delay the effective date of the ordinance until a development agreement is signed with the developer as opposed to reverting. So that would mean that we wouldn't actually publish and this would not become effective until a development agreement was signed. Otherwise, we end up rezoning one way and then we would have to come back to you just procedurally and say, now we're going to go back again. So it's easier to just delay the effectiveness of the rezoning until a development agreement is signed. That's the way I would recommend that you amend.
I would like to make my amendment in that manner to delay the effective date until a development agreement is in place.
Second, that makes sense.
Commissioner Rudolph moved and Commissioner Hayford O'Leary seconded the amendment. Any discussion? All right, seeing as there is no discussion, may we have roll call? Nellie, on the amendment. Is that what I should, yeah.
Chair Quam. Commissioner Hayford O'Leary. I think there's a little bit of feedback. If everyone could make sure they're muted. Thank you. Commissioner Pinn.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin.
Aye.
The ayes have it and the motion passes.
All right, so then we go back to the original motion. Somebody help me out here. Now we will discuss and vote on the original motion as it was put forward by Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
As amended by what we just agreed to.
Okay. So now we need a motion on the original.
No, that motion is still active on the table, so we just need further discussion on that or to vote on that as amended.
Okay, so further discussion on the original motion with the amendment. Anyone? All right, so we are ready for roll call, and can someone read that back? Are you able, someone read that back, the full thing?
Yep. So that would, Chair Quam, was a recommend approval of an ordinance that amends Richfield Zoning Code Appendix 1 to designate lots 3 through 8, Block 5, Lyndale Oaks Edition as planned mixed use, delaying the effective date of publishing the zoning ordinance until such time that the HRA agreement is approved.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so last call for discussion. Nellie, would you take roll call?
Thank you. Chair Quam,
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary, Commissioner Quinn,
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph,
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin.
Aye.
The ayes have it and the motion passes.
Thank you. The third part of this is the motion, a motion related to the PUD. Someone like to make a motion?
Is it possible to recommend not approving the motion as stated with an amendment then that we would prefer to see or require to see or like to see a parking ratio of 1.25, a minimum parking ratio of 1.25? If that seems to be where the commission's landing as a reasonable compromise? Is that how is that a way to go about this where you would basically deny the as stated with an amendment with what we're looking for?
Commissioner Lavin would handle that as we handled the last motion where there was an amendment. So someone would move it to get it started, and then we would amend from there, approve an amendment, and then come back and approve as a whole.
Okay, I move that we deny the resolution granting a conditional use permit and final development plans for a planned unit development at 6345 Lyndale Avenue and 600 West 64th Street.
Second.
And just to clarify, Commissioner Lavin, you wanted to move to deny rather than move to approve with conditions.
Oh, well, is that? I guess what's the procedure? Is it the same or is it?
I think that what you're trying to do is to move to approve with conditions added.
Okay. Then I change my motion to
Your motion. Yep.
approve with an amendment or a condition. A condition is what it would be. And the condition, do I state what the condition would be or the amendment?
Just procedurally, I know this gets really confusing. One should move the motion as it's written. Then you should make an amendment to include an additional provision.
Okay.
Before we do that, Matt, did you have a comment? I saw your hand.
Nope, Melissa covered it. I was just going to say to the commissioner that, you know, it's not a requirement to move the to approve or deny staff's recommended motion. The commission can add conditions as desired.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, then I make a motion to approve the resolution granting the conditional use permit and final development plans for a planned unit development at 6345 Lyndale Avenue and 600 West 64th Street with additional conditions.
And that condition would be?
A minimum parking ratio of 1.25.
I feel like we're going in circles here, but again, could we have that? Could we just move the initial motion first, and then we can have the discussion about the amendment? So your motion, I mean, you're free to make the motion. It's your motion. But it would be nice if it was just
the right order.
Is your intent just the staff recommendation And then we'll talk about the amendments that you want.
Okay.
Is that right?
I thought we've done it both
think either
ways in
way
the
is
past.
Commissioner Rudolph.
We've done it both ways in the past. I think how Commissioner Lavin has done it is probably just fine. I think that's how a lot of us are maybe feeling. I will second that.
Thank you. Commissioner Lavin made the motion. Commissioner Rudolph seconded.
Can I just clarify that the motion currently on the table does not have any specific conditions, and Commissioner Lavin or another commissioner will make a specific condition related to parking or something else? Is that
No,
right?
I believe Commissioner Lavin is choosing to do it the original way. He started it, adding the condition to the original motion.
Can you clarify what that condition is then?
Would you restate it? It is adjusting the parking to 1.25. Would you restate your whole motion, Commissioner Lavin, please?
Yes, my recommendation is to.
Maybe Matt could restate the motion.
Okay, thank you.
So moved by Commissioner Lavin and seconded by Commissioner Rudolph was a motion to recommend approval of a resolution granting a conditional use permit and final development plans for a planned unit development at 6345 Lyndale Avenue and 600 West 64th Street, with the additional condition that the planned unit development provide parking at a ratio of minimum 1.25 stalls per unit.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. Discussion. Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
So I think it's a reasonable compromise we're going towards. I generally support this. I do have two additional amendments I want to add, and it's kind of tedious with this roll call, but I think they're kind of different issues. So the first one is I would like to request that signage be added to both driveways directing traffic to Lyndale Avenue. So I make a motion that the PUD be approved with the condition that those signs be added.
I'll second that. So Commissioner Hayford O'Leary made the motion about the signs. I seconded it. Discussions? Okay, Nellie, would you take roll?
So it would be roll call on the Hayford O'Leary amendment only.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Only.
Chair Kwong.
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
Aye.
Commissioner Pinn.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph. I didn't.
Muted.
Sorry, I was muted.
Thank you. Commissioner Rosenberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin.
Aye.
The ayes have it and the motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay, so this.
O'Leary.
Thank you. The second item would be a condition that they provide an ADA accessible path between the sidewalk and the curb of 64th Street so people can access that trail. That's the motion. Just a brief explanation of why I'm putting that in. Currently, the only accessible, like actual meeting slope thing would be to go all the way to Lyndale and all the way back because the driveway ramp does not work for wheelchairs necessarily. So that is why I'm asking that that be included, just to make sure that the neighbors get the value out of that trail.
I second that.
Hayford O'Leary moves and Commissioner Lavin seconds it. Would you mind repeating it, Matt? Because there was a little discussion after. Can you just repeat the motion?
So Hayford O'Leary proposed an amendment to require that the trail on the trail from 64th Street into Garfield Park be modified to have an ADA accessible wheelchair ramp to 64th Street. Was there a second?
I think Brian seconded.
Ken seconded. Any discussion? Okay, can we take a roll call vote on Commissioner Hayford O'Leary's last motion?
Yes. Chair Kwong.
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
Aye.
Commissioner Pinn.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin.
Aye.
The ayes have it and the motion passes.
Thank you. Any other conditions people want to propose? Okay, if not, we're back to the original motion and we're on the discussion part of that. So any discussion about the big, the original but larger motion, this is the time to do it. This is Chair Quam. I think that condition of requiring 1.25 is just a very minimum, compromise. I'm not real comfortable, but I don't hear that we have a lot of options other than that, from what I understand. So that's how I feel about it. I think that's just the bare minimum and I'm not sure how they will meet that 1.25. Does that mean going and asking Lyndale Gardens for some spaces? And because that was another thing that was talked about. Does staff answer that for me?
You're putting a condition in here that the developer has to meet. The developer will have to explore their options and figure out a way to do that.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? All right, and the original motion, I'm sorry, I forgot who moved it and seconded it, but
Would it be helpful if I read it back once more?
Thank you. Yes, please.
So as moved by Commissioner Lavin and seconded by Commissioner Rudolph, there's a motion to recommend approval of a resolution granting a conditional use permit and final development plans for a PUD at 6345 Lyndale Avenue and 600 West 64th Street. The following additional conditions: to require minimum parking ratio of 1.25 stalls per unit, to require signs directing traffic towards Lyndale Avenue, and to require ADA access on the trail on the east end of the project from 64th Street.
Thank you, Matt. Any more discussion? Commissioner Hayford O'Leary and then Commissioner Lavin after that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm sort of the planner head of mine of going to planning school. I personally believe they probably won't all need all this parking, and I hope that in 5 years that we'll see that. Obviously, they'll do what they do. I think it is a reasonable compromise, but I think this will be an experiment for us. But I appreciate that we're weighing the sort of lived experience of the neighbors to what on paper seems like might be their parking need. So I hope the neighbors will be satisfied with this. And I did want to say that despite the parking thing, I still have those concerns about 64th Street in the winter, and I would still intend to look into those.
Commissioner Lavin?
I would basically just like to say, this seems to be the compromise that we're going to come to. I'd like to see more parking, quite frankly, given the concentration of multifamily. It just doesn't seem that we have the tools to get there higher or north of 1.25, since that is our current minimum for these types of projects. So maybe city staff and city council could take an opportunity to look at that ratio, because I envision a lot more of these conversations happening in the future as we develop our corridors. So that's all I need. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Raise your hand. All right, well, we will take a roll call vote now. Nellie?
Thank you. Chair Quam?
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary?
Aye.
Commissioner Pinn?
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph?
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin?
Aye.
The ayes have it. The motion passes.
Thank you, Nellie. And I just want to say I appreciate everybody's input. This was complicated and difficult. All right, the next item on the agenda are the liaison reports.
Chair
First,
Quam, we want to get to item 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. So as I understand, item 2 on the agenda, I believe that's been altered a little, and staff will tell us how that's been changed. That motion has been canceled rather than continued. Would you like me to say more, staff, or do you want to take it?
I can take it from here, Chair Quam.
Thank you.
So applications were submitted to convert the single-family home at 6544 Newton Avenue into an office apartment use. The comprehensive plan designates the property as community commercial. The applicant was requesting to rezone the property and request a site plan approval. However, the motion in front of you is going to be to continue the application until next month. However, the applicant has opted to withdraw their application at this time as the project costs had gotten out of hand. So for the time being, they just intend to leave the property as a single family home. So the motion and the recommended motion in front of you should be altered to cancel the public hearing rather than continue. That's all I have.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a motion to cancel the public hearing to consider land use application? Commissioner Pinn moves, and who seconded? Commissioner Rudolph. So any discussion? Okay, Nellie, would you take roll?
Thank you. Chair Quam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
Aye.
Commissioner Penn.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin. All ayes, the ayes have it, and the motion passes.
Thank you, Nellie. So now we come to the liaison reports. So first up, we have Community Services Advisory Commission. Any report?
Yeah, they met last week, and with COVID-19, they've had some discussions on budget. Unfortunately, with the rink already being closed for some planned maintenance, their budget isn't completely too far off. Although their budget will be reduced, they forecast. Other than that, not a whole lot right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Rudolph. Next is City Council. Any report?
No report.
Thank you. Next is Housing and Redevelopment Authority. I have no report. Richfield School Board?
Yes, we had a meeting as we kind of wrapped up our school year, and we're looking towards the future. And I'm happy to report that we went through the numbers. There's been certainly some financial impact with COVID and our continued lunch service, and we're able to cover those expenses with our current reserves throughout FPAC and the board and administration. Over the last several years, we've worked very hard to increase our reserves, and we feel comfortable that we're in a good spot. Hopefully, this disruption doesn't last a significant amount of time, but I think that there's certainly some impact into the next couple of years probably, and certainly a little bit of unknown from the state. So, but with that saying, I think that the continuity of education will continue, and that Richfield finances remain in a good spot.
Thank you, Commissioner Lavin. Next is Transportation Commission.
Transportation Commission spent the last meeting talking quite a bit about 65th Street. So if you guys aren't aware, this project got suspended and is sort of back in active planning for reconstruction next year. So 65th Street behind the hub all the way over to Richfield Lake and down to 66th. That's going to be rebuilt. So I would recommend you check it out, richfieldsweetstreets.org. Obviously, it's close to this project we spent much of the evening talking about. So we'll likely include a roundabout at Lyndale Avenue and mixed-use side trail on the north side. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Hafer O'Leary. I don't believe we have anyone for Chamber of Commerce, do we? No? Okay. Anything else I missed?
I would like to just extend my appreciation and some kudos for Chair Quam, for how this meeting went, and city staff as the first real meeting that we've done in this format. I thought it went exceptionally smooth, and I appreciate that.
Well, that's nice. Thank you.
Likewise, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a little bit harder. All right. So next is the city planner's report.
Yes, Chair Quam, I know it's late, so I'm not going to bore you with the details here, but I did want to mention, I sent you a memo about some information related to small cells, and I presented that to the city council last night. It was their first look at it. We did draft some aesthetic and spacing requirements for small cell installations. We talked through those last night. They were generally very happy with what we had proposed. I think it's what we as the planning commission have talked about. It's what we've talked about with the council in the past. And so I don't think any of it was a surprise. They were supportive of removing the conditional use permit for residential small cell installations. As you're aware, because you've been on the planning commission, those public hearings can feel really bad because the city does not actually have a lot of authority to say no to these. We have the authority to put some reasonable spacing and aesthetic regulations in place, which is what we're going to do, but we have very little authority to say that they can't go in or to make any comments at all related to potential health impacts, because that is federally regulated. So we had been having these hearings, and I think the public would attend those hearings expecting to have some real input and potentially impact where these could be, or the fact that they didn't want them in their neighborhood and they couldn't. It felt very disingenuous. Staff was given a really hard time by the public. You were given a really hard time by the public, and so was the council. So the idea here is not to take away public input, but to take away public input that really can't get anybody anywhere. So we're hoping to bring these to you next month and have them in place in July. Then we'll take them to the city council. So just to let you know that they're coming, there are materials up on the city council's website if you want to take any further look at those. And that's it.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
I'm just wondering if staff could give a brief update about the temporary regulations for outdoor dining at restaurants. I saw there was something about that today, but I know with restaurants being able to open for outdoor dining, there were some measures taken.
Right. So the city went ahead and allowed expansion of outdoor seating areas to help restaurants in this time when they're not allowed to have dine-in patrons. So we allowed expansion of those dining areas into parking lots, and we're making sure that they're not in ADA handicap stalls, that fire lanes are protected, those kinds of things, but allowing the restaurants the ability to expand on the sidewalk or out into their mostly empty, unfortunately right now, parking lots. So staff worked really quickly to get that together. You'll see a number of other communities making those kind of emergency orders to allow these kinds of things to help our businesses. And in that same vein, if you haven't been following the work of the EDA, we approved a COVID loan program, and we're starting to get checks out the door to small businesses in Richfield. I think we've got maybe 16 checks out the door to Richfield businesses. A number of them are minority and women owned. They're all small businesses under 25 employees. It feels like really great work, and it's been a lot of work that staff has done on this. We've put this program together in about 6 weeks when it would normally take us 6 to 9 months to get something like this done. It's definitely been a learning experience, but it feels really good to help the local folks here in Richfield.
Wonderful. Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Rosenberg.
Just a quickie too, to speaking about money and this COVID, the Richfield Foundation just last night gave $30,000 out to grants that we had accepted through the Minnesota Disaster Relief Fund. And we were able to give some funds to 3 small businesses in Richfield, as well as several agencies. So that's been my time for the month of May, and I've loved it because as I say, I don't think any of us realize the kind of work that's going on in this community. We get down because of the virus and what's going on in our quarantine, but there are people out there who are doing marvelous work for the people that are being impacted the most. And a lot of this funding was to go towards people that are very much impacted by the virus, including people, immigrant status, people that are undocumented, that need some help, that are not eligible for federal help. And so we were able to help some people, and it really kind of boosted me up for this, for what we're facing in this virus. But I know that those checks from the HRA also and everything went out too. So, and that's really helping. So there is good things being done out there. And I think we have to keep that in mind as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosenberg, and for everybody's work on this around this time. All right, that brings us to the end of tonight's meeting. Our next regular meeting of the Planning Commission will be Monday, June 22nd at 7 p.m. The same format on WebEx. And just to repeat that, there are instructions for both the open forum and the public hearings on the website, in particular the Planning Commission's agendas and meetings webpage. So we hope you will continue to be engaged. Do we have a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Commissioner Rudolph moves and Commissioner Rosenberg seconds. Any discussion? All right.
You have a procedural question to Melissa and maybe Matt as far as signing the minutes, being secretary.
We're going to work on getting you those documents via Adobe so that you can electronically sign them and get them right back to us. We'll contact you to get that done after this meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, Nellie, will you take the roll call on adjourning?
Yes, I will. Chair Quam?
Aye.
Commissioner Hayford O'Leary?
Aye.
Commissioner Pinn?
Aye.
Commissioner Rudolph?
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Lavin?
Aye.
The ayes have it and the motion passes.
All right, for our meeting. Thanks, everyone.